Alright, hello everybody, and welcome to this session of the GM support group. As you can see, things are already different than last session. We're going to be starting, hopefully, the long-term design of the show today with a few announcements before we get into the nitty-gritty of our show. First, the most important piece of news and announcements that I have for you today is that the VODs, the permanent VODs, will be on YouTube. You can find them at this address. I will say, until we get a large number of YouTube subscribers, there is not a clean link. So the easiest way to find us is just to search for the GM support group. And all of our VODs, from the first through to the current session, will be live a week after the initial broadcast. So next week, Session 4 will be up on YouTube around 9 a.m. Pacific time. Our second piece of news is that we will be doing a Q&A section at the end of every session, so long as we've gotten some questions. Now, every week, if you have questions during the show, you can ask in chats on the live broadcast on Twitch. However, if you are not able to watch live, or you think of a question after the show is over, you can always send us an email at this email address, and this will be the subject line for next session. Our next session is November 1st, 2 weeks from today. And if you email us at that email address that you can see on your screen, we will be able to answer your question at the end of our session. So today we have, I believe, one question that came in by email this week, and we'll get to that just after the 5-minute design challenge that we're doing this week. Alright, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Behind the Screen. Alright, so, welcome panelists, and let's go ahead and get started with our topic for today. We're going to be talking about fudging dice rolls. Now, for those of you who are not aware what this specifically means, you'll find out soon enough. In general, it is the lying of the GM on whatever they happen to roll on their dice for whatever reason. So, just like we've done the last couple times, let's go ahead and roll initiative to see who's going to be talking first. Alright, 15 to 20? Cool.
I don't know, am I fudging it?
Oh, what'd you get, Rob?
5.
5. Walker, you got a 4?
Yep.
Fizzer, what'd you get?
I ask, am I fudging
Are you
this?
fudging it? That's up to you.
Because, at this point it's kind of Schrodinger's roll. Either I got a 20, or I got a 2.
True. I'm going to assume you got a 2, because that's more entertaining for me, as it lets me go first.
They're right next to each other.
Yes. Alright, I rolled an 18,
dude.
so I guess I'll go first. First time for everything, I suppose. So, with fudging dice rolls, I'm of the opinion that when the dice do not fall in the way that the story that's been occurring at the table seems to dictate, that's when I might consider fudging a die roll. And I try to lean away from fudging dice, from changing what I roll behind the screen as much as possible. I like the randomness that can occur, and there are times where a failure can be greater than a success ever could be. And there are a few situations where that's happened in my campaigns, where somebody failing to notice something or somebody failing on a saving throw has changed everything in the game. But there are times where, or moments where in my games, if something doesn't happen, it's really going to change things. It's either going to derail the entire campaign, or it's just not going to be fun for any of the players involved, or for me either as the GM. Those are the times when I intend or have in the past fudged rolls. And usually it's something like if I roll a natural 20 and it's going to kill a character who is really, really pivotal to the story in a way that would be difficult to replicate with a different character, I might make it miss by 1 instead. Something like that is pretty easy to do, especially when you're playing at a physical location, at a physical table. As far as rolling fudging rolls online, it gets a little bit more difficult. There are things you can do on Fantasy Grounds. There are modifiers you can put to the roll, but you have to be a little bit careful with that. If you still roll a crit, it'll still be a crit even if it misses, or even if you have a modifier that's like a -5 or whatever. Things like that can be a little bit trickier when you're not playing in person. But again, I tend to think more story focused as far as rolling of the dice than anything else. Walker, I think. Aaron, yeah. Or Fizzer, sorry.
Yeah. It comes out eventually.
Yeah.
What would you say about the statement, which appears in various parts of the internet? A perfect game has no fudged rolls.
I would be inclined to say that statement has been made by someone who doesn't understand the reality of running a game. Things happen, and sometimes rolls don't go the way they should. Sometimes there are moments that really would benefit by having something different happen. And I think that, yeah, whoever made that statement probably hasn't played a game of something like D&D. Other systems might be different, where your rolls might not have as many consequences. But as far as D&D and similar RPGs to that, the dice are just a tool.
Right. I think fudging rolls
dice
is
are just a tool.
Yeah, dice are just a tool, but it's a more critical tool in combat situations than in skill challenges for the most part. Because with skill challenges, you have an option of degrees of success as opposed to a combat where they hit or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I say you wouldn't have to fudge rolls as much, because even though they don't succeed, you can give them something that gets them in the right direction.
Unless you're playing in a system where there are degrees of success to combat.
True.
That is true.
And that makes it different because it's not just a pass-fail, and that makes things much easier to run without having to fudge rolls.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think Rob was next.
Am I next with 5? That's unfortunate.
Yep.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what you had to say, Steven. Definitely when it comes, I think the biggest fudge of rolls is when it comes to killing characters.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, in my personal opinion, I think that killing characters is something that is inevitable eventually in some regards, but that should add meaning into the story as well. Like any DM can kill a character, right? You know, just an adult dragon at level 1, go for it. You know, anyone can kill a character, but is it, in my opinion, does it add meaning to the game, to the story? Did it happen at a interesting time? Things like that. And so, if I'm going to kill a character, I really think to myself, is like, is this an appropriate time to do something like that? And if it's not, then I fudge the roll a bit and make it miss, or do something else, something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of everyday, like just playing the game, I tend to try not to. I think that probably the most fudged rolls I've done is probably closer to skill checks. I try to keep combat as deadly and as hard as it should be. You know, if you get crit, then well, you get crit, and that's just how the dice falls. You know. But if you're jumping across a cavern full of lava or something like that, then that's where, kind of like you said, Walker, the degrees of success, you know, barring rolling a natural 1, I try to give the players as much opportunity to succeed as possible.
Right.
You know, deck saves, like giving them. I might not, and that's another thing too. Is like I might not necessarily fudge the dice, but I'll say, hey, Walker, you have the opportunity to roll a deck save to catch Steven as he falls, or something like that. You know, which is another version of fudging the dice.
Yeah,
in reality,
it's
right?
fudging the dice, but from the other end, fudging more the DC than anything else.
Exactly. It's basically giving you advantage because I'm giving someone else, you know, the opportunity to roll another D20 or whatever.
I mean, giving advantage is another type, really, because
fudging the dice. Yeah,
someone could roll and you could realize, oh, you know what? I kind of really want this thing to go better for them than not. And at least in my experience, some DMs will just kind of throw out as the die are being cast. Oh wait, with advantage.
Yeah.
And then you realize, it came up decent. But then they roll a second one and realize, whew, man, glad that happened.
Yeah. I've done that
Yeah.
several times because like somebody roll a dice and it'll be poor, and then I'm like, oh well, based off your character, or based off your proficiency in nature or whatever, I think you would know more information about this, so you can roll an advantage or something along those lines, or allow the player to fight for that.
You know what? Add a +5 for like circumstantial bonus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but in that regard, I try to keep combat as true to combat as it can be,
right?
Barring the killing a character side of things.
Yeah.
That one I kind of take into a little bit more serious consideration, because especially with our group of players, that you really invest a lot of time into your players and things like that. We do a lot of RP, and we really do have a large character development. So losing an actual player that's been there from day zero, is substantial. Like having to, Walker, if I killed off your character or something, like, you'd have to come up. Like, could you imagine coming up with a new character at this given moment? Like, it's very.
Yeah. Oh no, I have like 3 stacked up because I always expect.
But then fitting it in with the storyline.
It definitely is a challenge. Yeah,
it's a challenge.
No, I got you. Yeah.
And
oddly enough, that topic dovetails into what we'll be talking about next.
Yeah. True.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's my take on fudging dice. Is I do it kind of not necessarily by fudging it behind the screen, but maybe giving other players the opportunity to help, which accounts for it in its own regard. So.
Yeah,
right. That's good.
All right, Walker, I believe you are next.
Yeah. So with fudging dice, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last time we did the show with the meaning of death to me. Where if you make it so you fudge too much, you take away some of the impact the game has, because there's no risk in anything anymore. Where they have in their head, whether they realize it or not, they're thinking, I'm more likely to succeed than fail because the DM's fudging so much, whether they realize you're doing it or not.
Right.
Whereas if you keep it a little bit closer to the chest and only use it sparingly, you get that same sort of impact to the story and different story beats where risk is involved and you don't feel like you're handing it to them. And I think that's very important, that I like difficult games. I like making things difficult, and it's always, for me, I like seeing how the players come together and figure out how to get through specific situations, and rolling the dice is a big part of that. And I love to see random chance, what they're thinking, what skills they have, how they put it all together to make it work, because that's what's great about D&D and role-playing games in general. You have so much freedom that I think fudging rolls takes a little bit of that away, honestly. And it's hard. I'd say it's kind of a slippery slope, where if you start getting in the habit of fudging rolls, you're more likely to do it in the future to keep the story moving. And then I know one of the ways that I've done it most often is behind the screen. Rather than fudging die rolls, I let it roll most often the way it will. I'll fudge the things on my side where I control a little bit more actively the DC of certain checks, the amount of health a monster has, little things like that, where it's not as obvious that you're doing it, because
there are a lot of dials that you can move on.
Exactly,
yeah. Yeah, I was doing
it's
that
not
last
as
night.
obvious. Like, there's no die roll, and it's like, roll one more.
Yeah.
Instead, it's oh yeah, you hit him, but he's still up. He's looking a little bit hardier than the rest of his fellows there.
It's the type of fail forward mentality that sometimes, you get there, your axe bites in, and it just seems to hit like a thicker set of scales on his back. And like, okay, sure, like, you're still a competent character. And maybe fudging rolls would allow you to do damage in that case, or just the way you describe something can smooth that out a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, that definitely plays into that as well. That they're adventurers. They're the skilled party that's going out doing things that they're good at. Like, some of them have something like a +7 or 8 to a skill that they're trying to use, and they get an @1 or something, and they're just failing incredibly, but their character wouldn't do that. So the way you describe that is take the big portion of the story of they're not bumbling idiots, they're just having a little bit of rough luck.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
But-
Fizzer, I think it is you now.
It should surprise no one that I have different ideas on this than the rest of you.
Yeah.
Because I started in Cypher System and Numenera, I didn't roll dice because the game master in that system does not roll dice. Everything is rolled by the players, and since it's all rolled out in the open, you don't have the opportunity to fudge anything, except for the target number that they're going after. You don't always tell them what it is because in some cases they're still learning about the thing they're interacting with. Sometimes when they're interacting with something, you've already set the target number too high for what they're trying to accomplish, and you realize it would be more interesting at this moment for them to succeed. Is there a way that they could succeed right now? And there's a mechanic built into that game called GM intrusions that kind of skips over that, and you can say, all right, yeah, you failed to do that, but I'm going to give you a piece of XP. You get to give another piece of XP to somebody else. It very low number XP values in this game. You're not talking about hundreds. You're talking about 4. And in accepting that and accepting the intrusion by the game master, you get to tweak the world a bit. And I've brought this up before, but in the context of fudging rolls in my experience almost always happens when there's a mismatch between the fiction and the mechanics. And intrusions are kind of a slip or a sliding clutch maneuver that brings you back into synchronicity between them. So say you've got a group that's all trying to get across a chasm, and they keep failing either by almost falling in, or the grappling hook they throw over bounces off of something and doesn't manage to hit. And whatever it is, maybe they're just rolling really poorly, maybe they're not putting in effort, another mechanic for the game that tells you that they're interested in it. But rather than turning around, they're just kind of stuck there. You can introduce a new element. Say a creature rises up from the chasm they're trying to cross, and all of a sudden it starts talking to them. You've changed what would be a athletic, kind of climbing thing into a different type of situation. So it's less fudging and more just turning on its axis. Now, when I've run D&D, I definitely fudge.
Yeah. I think I've caught it once when I've played with you.
If you only caught it once, that means I'm doing it well.
That was my point.
I tend... So, Rob, I tend to do the inverse of what you do. The story-based stuff and the skill challenges, I set them up possibly with just easier DCs. But in combat, I fudge a little bit more, because combat has all of these different moving parts, and what matters to me in that moment as the dungeon master is the drama and the impact of that fight, which is probably not a common mentality to take into that as a game master, but it's been burned in by what I started with.
Yeah, that's just two slightly different styles of play, and there's nothing saying that you can't do both. Have dramatic story-based fights and difficult fights that you have to really rely on strategy. And it seems like both of you are a little more on opposite sides of that, and Walker and I might be somewhere in the middle, but that is definitely a spectrum that you have to play with when you're designing combats. And maybe
another level of that. Another level of that is I don't typically use maps or gridded zones when I run. I do it mostly theater of the mind, which means you might be maybe 15 feet, 30 feet away from somebody, and different spells have different distances. And if you can't reach somebody in time, that's a dramatic moment. But if it's just, I need to march all the way over here and then use the thing, that's less interesting. And again, it's not dice fudging, but I'll fudge distances. And like Walker brought up, I'll fudge health, and whatever else to make the combat a bit tighter and more interesting.
Right. For the sake of time, I'm going to suggest that we actually discuss different styles of running combats in one of our next sessions, just because I think there's a lot that we can do with that. And we really do need to get on to our next topic so we don't run over.
Okay.
So yeah, next session, let's talk about, whoever's on our panel, let's talk about different styles of running combats. I think that will be something useful for a lot of GMs. In the meantime, we're going to be going away from the table for our next topic on introducing new characters to a campaign. All right, so let's go ahead and start by rolling to see who's going to be talking first. A little more normal for me.
17.
18.
14.
10. I get to go last. That's pretty classic. All right, so 18 was Walker?
Nope.
Fizzer, gotcha. All right.
I
Welcome back.
last in one, first in the other.
There we go.
So, introducing characters. I had a very rough experience when I started out, and I think that informed a lot of how I run that particular part of the game now. My first ever campaign started off with, well, I mean, the game gives you little phrases and connections you can make with other people. So let's use those. Seems pretty straightforward, good tool. And my players split off into two groups and only used their connections in those groups.
Mm.
And I had no way of getting those two groups to actually interact in a way that held them around each other. I could have gone with the simple thing of talking to my players and say, hey, could you lean into working together? But this is the first thing I ever ran, so I didn't really think of that at the time. Instead, I spent 3 sessions railroading them into having things that required abilities that both groups had, so they had to work together, and that didn't work great. And we almost stopped playing because one of those sessions was just me thinking up, why don't I give them a monster that's also a dungeon for them to interact with? That'll get them to bond. And it turned into a slog where they kept pulling one character out of the monster's mouth, and then the character kept almost dying, and then jumping back in because there was a shiny thing in it.
Mm.
And everybody got really tired. Nowadays, from my experience, I have learned that getting the players to all talk together in a session 0 type deal, and determine we all know each other, we've been working together on something, offloads a lot of that work. And then you have this wonderful experience of we all met on this in the circus, or we all met on this particular pirate ship. And then you have a little bit of a backstory that you can interweave, but it doesn't get in the way of the driving action for why they're doing something now. I've also had that, that's just starting off a game.
Mm-hmm.
Introducing somebody partway through is, I think, a bit easier in my experience, because you already have some established characters. If it's a new player coming in and you don't know what that dynamic is going to be like, you just got to have a little bit of grace and say, this new character, we're going to have them talk about what connections they might have with the party or with the plot that's going on at the moment. And those connections, I'll write down in my notes and say, all right, have I checked these off by the end of their first session? If not, then I'm going to leave them up for the next one. And until I have checked them all off, I'm not going to let things progress too much. Just kind of pull on a little bit of the brakes, let the party mingle again, and then once they've gotten a bit more familiar with each other, release the brake and let them roll down the hill into the gulch.
All right, Rob, I believe you rolled next. Let's see what you have to think on introducing new characters.
I So I guess I'd be a bit opposite of what Fizzer has to say.
That's surprising.
Yeah. So introducing new characters from a brand new campaign, I consider myself to be very good at. I kind of take an approach that when playing with other GMs and things like that, I have never seen before in terms of running a session 0 for each individual player and introducing them together as a group more naturally rather than taking away their player agency and saying, oh, okay, you all met in the, like, railroading them and you all met in this bar kind of a thing. Or even like doing it in the sense kind of what Fizzer said, where like you all have a session 0 together and say, okay, how do our backstories interact with one another? I guess I like it to be way more of a mystery than that. Like you guys didn't even like when Steven and Walker there, you guys didn't even know what player characters or race or class or anything that the party was. You guys just chose what you wanted to play. That's what you were, and you wrote your backstory. And it was up to me as the GM to basically work your way to where you guys all finally met at one another. Right? It was very, very natural, and things just happened. And finally, eventually, after a session, you guys all wound up together. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I enjoy that a bit more just because it doesn't take away the play. It feels like it doesn't take away the player's freedom to do what they want to do. And so in most other cases, I feel like it takes away the freedom of the player agency from the player.
Is it freedom or is it shared fiction?
I mean,
that's true. There's a bit of a fine balance in there. If the players are all, if they can all agree on, you know, where they met and how they met, that's a little bit different than taking away their freedom, because they might have had they might have had different paths that they took to get there, and that's perfectly fine. But it definitely reduces the mystery involved with all of the characters together.
But that's different.
Some players don't like that mystery component.
You still have the player freedom, because given Yarson and Cole, we got together outside of the game from the DM and said, "Hey, we want to make a character together."
Right.
And like we want to make a brother, like we were going to be brothers. And that was completely freedom, but it was still a mystery to everyone else, even though it wasn't a mystery to us, right? Right. The GM, but it was still up to the GM. So it still gives the opportunity, if say 4 players out of the 5 wanted to say, hey, we came from this guild, then that's fine, that you can do that. It still gives the player that freedom. However, it's allowing what you said, Fizzer, but it's still not forcing them to do that in that regard either.
I've never really
It's a little different the way he runs his games.
Yeah. I'm thinking of it in terms of like, so I run a mercenary game right now, right? And everybody...
That's a very gilded type, like, interaction,
right? So I put
yeah.
in front of all of my potential players, like, hey, these are a couple different game types I'm interested in running. And, you know, they chose the mercenary one, which means they all have the shared fiction of, you know, we all, you know, are in a mercenary guild, and we've been running it for a bit.
Yeah, but your environment
but they all have
created automatically is already more. You're giving them the freedom to do what they want to, choose their mercenary guild, but they're already. I'm going to use the word railroaded very lightly here, because that's not the case. You're already you're already giving them the they're in this guild type scenario, right? Versus what I gave my players, I said, here's a map.
Where are you from? Yeah.
Where are you from?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
it can literally be anywhere. You can say, I want to be from a tribal village right here. I said, okay. Or, hey, this is my character's backstory. Where do you think this most will fit in? And I will give you five locations and say, well, this is this, this is this, this is this. And you're like, okay, this fits my character backstory way better. And so I'm going to go there.
Do you have a central plot in your game?
He does.
Oh, yeah.
Now the main difference
that central plot would be that, like, binding shared fiction, right?
But there's a bit of a difference. The way that Rob sort of presents his game, and sort of the way that I do it as well, is that you kind of come together and have no idea of anything that's going on, and eventually, depending on how you're playing and how the group is sort of meshing together, the story can be built out of that. And not everything is determined from the beginning. We don't know. We could become a mercenary company, but that is entirely dependent on what we end up doing. Now, that's a completely different style of play from the other sort of style where you say, all right, well, I'm interested in running, and this is something I've thought about doing, and I might do before my next full campaign, is a shorter entirely story-driven thing where I tell my players, all right, you guys are going to be working for the university archives, and your job is literally to go and collect artifacts. And there's going to be a story in there, and the characters that they choose then is going to be much more focused on the story, as opposed to the story being focused on the characters.
So, in my opinion, it's the difference between running a module and running an open world sandbox, right?
Right.
So giving like, oh, you all are part of this. You can choose your mercenary guild. That's going to be your more module-esque type. Yes, this is like there is going to be.
I would have said that it was a sandbox.
Nah, not in my opinion.
It feels much more to me the style that Fizzer that you tend to run feels much more to me like a module. In that the players go in knowing their characters are going to be mercenaries. That entirely changes what sorts of characters they're going to be playing.
Right. They can still go anywhere.
Right. So
it's more setting. It's less
under the guise that they're part of a mercenary guild.
Right, but it's not
less quite
of
a module
set to a certain story. It's more a module, or not a module, but it's more of.
I don't think that's a module.
It's closer to a module than a full sandbox. Module's not the right word.
A story with a groundwork and a frame to it that allows it to grow. And that's, I think, a little different than a module where it's very much on the rails as opposed to you give them a firm base and then say, go where you will.
Can we put it this way? That's the style of your mercenary game. It already has a story framework sort of built up, but that framework can grow and change depending on what the characters choose to do. Whereas the other style that Rob and I and Walker to a certain extent tend to run doesn't have much of a framework at all to begin with, and where the players go, it has a semblance of a plot, but that plot can entirely change depending on what the characters choose to do.
Based off what the characters do. Yeah.
So it's
that
the framework growing up around.
3 more questions that I'm not going to ask right now because that would take too long.
All right. Well, this sounds like another topic we can get into. How do you write your stories? So let's go back to introducing characters for a bit. And talk about.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
So,
it's all good.
This
is
really cool discussion.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, it's something we definitely need to talk about in a future session. How do you write your stories? So, let's go back to introducing characters. Yeah,
wrapping up my character stuff. In my opinion, I actually find it much harder to introduce a brand new character into a plot where there's already a foundation of players that have melded together, because it's always hard to be. So we're friends, all of us here, right? And it's always hard for that fifth person to kind of wiggle their way into the friend group, in my opinion, without having.
I can attest to that. Yeah.
Without having a backwards, another, for instance, like Steven introduced you to us, right? But if you were a random person trying to wiggle your way into this group, that would be very awkward and very hard and very kind of just, it's much harder in my opinion, right? And so that's kind of how I feel about introducing a new character into an already existing party. For instance, introducing Grothar and Absum, for instance. Like Grothar, in my opinion, the way that I left Styles, I think was great, but the way I introduced Grothar, I think I could have done a little bit better.
The only issue I think with that introduction is that Grothar's ethos is very different from most of the party. He is entirely a good character, almost as far on the good side of the alignment as you can go, which is the only issue that he's had with adjusting to the party. But I'm fortunately a reasonably good role player, I like to think, and can kind of squeeze my way into that situation a little bit easier than others might be able to. But yeah.
And talking Absum, I feel like I introduced him well. It makes sense. You guys weren't part of the only jail cell people in there, right? There's other people there, and he was introduced, and you all broke out together, kind of a thing. And that's a good way to bond together. But even then, it's a little bit awkward having this the sixth person like all of a sudden there for the time being until you guys come together a bit more. You know what I mean? In the beginning stages. So
it adds to the party dynamic though, because the party is
definitely
product of the environment, and if you have the one person that that's new that doesn't quite get along, it's okay. What are we doing to either get him in or kind of put him at an arm's distance?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, definitely. I think over time, that's when the party. Because over time, given enough persistence, that fifth person that's a little random, coming back, and always trying to be part of the group, will eventually become part of the group, right? Unless you guys
or an arch villain. I mean, that could also turn into a villain.
Which could be good.
You guys absolutely hate them, and then you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But
you can't stay neutral in that case. That's the
right.
When talking about friends and playing D&D and introducing a new character, the player and DM unspoken contract allowing more players to come in and being nice about that kind of regard, it still is a little bit awkward for the time being. Like he basically left you guys to die, last session. And so because he's only known you for 3 days, what I mean?
It doesn't help that we set fire to an acid lake with a kraken in it. That was a very crazy situation. So
yeah,
but
yeah, I would have run away too.
Nonetheless,
yeah,
I personally enjoy introducing one of my favorite parts of the entire game is the session 0 and session 1, getting the group together, because I think I do that very, very well. But yeah.
All right, Walker, if you have any comments, we'll have to keep it a little brief so we don't go too far over time.
Yeah. So yeah, and that kind of fits with what I do. Is I love the introduction of characters as well, except I do mine faster, if that makes sense. Because I get the story going quickly, because I know that's why we're all here. Yeah,
just make sure everybody has haikus.
Yeah, we'll figure out what everybody is as this adventure moves forward. At the moment, all they got to do is meet and have that moment where it's okay, this is what we're doing. So the way I do that is in the beginning, I've noticed it's very different between running the module that I'm running now and then the homebrew.
Mm-hmm.
But for the homebrew, I liked it because I was able to go, okay, what is your character? Like, what do you want to be? And like, let's say the two of you were half-orc brothers from a tribe somewhere. So I'm like, okay, in my world, there is a half-orc tribe here. Is that okay with you? And then I gave them a snip of map of my world that said you would know about this region. If you wanted to learn something about this region or towns in this region, I would give that to you freely as you travel through. And then I would do the same for all the different characters to get them where they were around my little world. And then I would go, okay, to make this party have something that pulls them together, I weave their backstories together and have points where they've touched each other in the past, whether they realize it or not. And that's where I like playing with the mystery aspect of it. Is every one of the characters in my story, for my homebrew at least, knew each other in some way or interacted with each other in some way before they met up again and started the campaign proper.
So you play with fate.
I play with
fate. Exactly.
I remember Kyriarchos had a vision of Yarson and Cole or something like that. We never got to hear about that because he died. But
died, yeah.
Yeah, but
I made it so it builds itself, and it's enough that they're not aware of itself, and I leave that to them to figure out. And I love that aspect of, your backstory, they know their backstory, and you'll be talking about it, and then realize, wait a minute, I know you. Why do I know you?
Yeah.
And then they think back, and it kind of builds the characters and it either brings the party together or pushes them apart depending on how they react to it.
Yeah.
And
can I ask another question?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
What do you do with players who don't want to do that?
That's actually a very good point. Mike is a good example of that. Mike likes to play role-playing games. He does not as much enjoy the role-playing aspect of it. He likes more the tabletop part of it. So
being with friends, combat,
that whole part of it, and that's something you have to know about your players, is how willing they are to get into their character, and that kind of drives how much of the story you put into their character, enough for them to be comfortable with who they are and what their role is, and they can grow or shrink that depending on how the game goes as you go forward. But for Mike, since I know he was like that, whereas some of the others are more closely tied together, he's more a in and out, glancing. He touched them at one point and he's around. he's got his things, and they'll come up eventually. But he doesn't have to feel like he has to be in the story, in the narrative at all times, because I know that makes him
an audience
uncomfortable.
member too.
Yes, and that's important with
versus the role that Styles took, where he was like he was the driving plot for like the
first 5 levels almost.
Session,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The first 5 levels, yeah.
And that's very important to know what your players.
Exactly, that's something we knew about
right,
Steven. You know,
right. I love to play the role.
Yeah, exactly. He wants to be a part of it, and so I definitely agree with that. Know your players for sure.
Yeah.
Right, and that's how I always tie the story together and introduce players at the start, and then my first session is usually it was kind of the same in both of them. I don't run a session 0 for everybody. Session 0 is I will give everybody basically where they're going to start in the session, and then I pick one of them to start with and follow as they meet everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you play a getting the band together session.
Getting the band together. I love doing that. Right. And I always pick either one or two people to come together. Like in the last one with the homebrew, it was the Half-Orc brothers with their half-elven ranger friend that they rescued from some danger. Left it up to you guys to decide what that is, because I didn't really make it defined. And you were coming into the city after this danger. You were helping them, or he was helping you track down a person from your past. Mm-hmm. You made your way into the city, and you ran into a couple of conflict. There was a guard that was in conflict with some people that had recently taken over the city. They were going to conflict, and then I gave you the opportunity to intervene in said conflict, and that's how you gained another party member. Then you went and talked to a university trying to get information on this person. And they're like, oh, we know this one person in a cave recently moved outside of town that you can go talk to, and he may have some more information for you. And that's another character that they kind of got introduced to, and since he had a key piece of information about what they needed, they brought him along, and it felt a little bit more natural. I don't like the juxtaposition of you're in a room together, go, now. And I've seen that once in a game that I've played with a group that I found online. It was a little rocky at the start, but it kind of came together as we kept going. But I like having it so everybody has a reason why they came together. Mm-hmm. And it's, for me, introducing characters later on is fairly simple, because I'll just do that again where they're already doing their quest line, and then there's another cursory character that just kind of lines up. They were doing something before. I'll give them, if it's a couple levels in, a couple little adventures to get them up to where they would be based on where they are in the world, and then they happen to meet you doing something or other based on either their quest line or your quest line, where they have sometimes conflicting, sometimes the same synonymous or the same objective. So it's I find it very easy to pick and pull characters as we're going.
Yeah.
So
that's the way I do
orbital mechanics with narrative plot.
Yes.
yeah. All right, I'll be very brief. Fortunate thing about being the host. My style is probably in between Rob's and Walker's. My first session of technically my first D&D campaign was much more of the get the band together, but then the interesting thing was we had a few sessions where I knew a couple players weren't going to be able to join us, so they did the more kind of merge in as things happened, and they had session zeros, and they managed to figure out what was going on with their characters, why were they there, before they joined in with the rest of the group. So I had a sort of mini session 0 for 3 of the long-term players, and then eventually when the others could join in, they had a reason to go, and I guess I'm probably closer to Walker's method than Rob's, but I have been thinking about doing a full session 0 for every character before the band gets together, and I think that would be fun. Doing both Rob's and Walker's, because then the next session where the band gets together, when everybody's all together, it would be much more you now know why you got to this city, but now you have to get everybody together, and they'd actually be at second level.
But that's the thing. That's exactly how I did it, right? Yeah. So everyone had a session 0. Everyone got to the city that they were trying to find, and then the session 1 was me jumping around at the table saying, okay, what would you guys like to do? Okay, what would you guys like to do? And finally get, quote unquote, as you guys specified, getting the band together. Kind of a thing.
See, that's a thing I really want to do with a superhero RPG.
That would work
do
pretty
one-on-one origin stories with individual superheroes, and then have an Avengers style. We bring you together.
That's basically what this is. Yeah, and it works really well.
That's what Matt
Avengers
Mercer
is a good way to put it.
Basically, what I did is I adopted the Matt Mercer method of getting.
Although
the group
his
together.
method was a little bit different too. For campaign 2, they started with 3 sets of 2. Or sorry, they had three groups, but yeah, it was pretty similar.
You started with Veldora. Gundar started with Ilya, right?
Right.
So like you guys did have like
that is true.
Well.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we have a reason to trust maybe this person more than the rest of you.
And I'd be inclined to do that as well if the stories match up well as to where they're coming from and how that all goes. Mm-hmm. But all right, I think we've talked this point to death for the moment. And we will definitely talk about building stories in the future, because we might have to do a whole session on that, because that was apparently a quite contentious topic, or a lot of things to talk about at the very least.
I thought fudging dice rolls was going to be way worse.
I did too, but we all kind of agreed on how dice worked. But
it was like, dice sometimes don't do what you want, versus like, man, characters.
Just goes to show. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into roll initiative. We're going to be doing another 5-minute design challenge, so we will be back with you in a few seconds.
And I'm gonna run it.
Okay, let's see, and we are back. Walker's disappeared. Oh no, he'll be back shortly, I'm sure.
Walker cast invisibility.
He did cast invisibility, and I guess that's it. So we are going to be doing another 5-minute design challenge, and for that we're going to be rolling initiative, as is the name of the segment, to see who is in which group, and we'll probably have. Well, we're just going to figure out who's in what group naturally, because whoever's in my group has to stay here, and whoever's not in my group has to leave, so that we can do this. But hopefully Walker gets back quickly enough that we can roll for initiative. The three of us, though, let's go ahead and roll.
Yep, sorry about that.
It's all good.
Phone rang.
I have a 12.
I have a 13.
15.
19.
All right. So that Rob and I are not partnered again, just to give a different feel to the design. Not that I didn't enjoy working with you, Rob, of course. Walker and I will work together, since we are the middle range.
Okay.
All right. And now we need to figure out what we are going to be designing. So I'd like somebody to roll a d8, and I'll say if it's a 5, which would correspond with a ring, you're going to roll again. Walker's first to hold up a... you rolled a 3. Perfect. We're going to be designing a potion.
Potion.
Yes, so potion will be interesting, as have I.
Potion seller.
Let's see. Fizzer, why don't you go ahead... Actually, no. Walker, why don't you go ahead and roll a d6?
D6.
To determine the rarity.
That'd be a 4.
4 is very rare. Okay, that would be... I need an example of a very rare potion. Because I've not run D&D a lot lately. Potion of invisibility is very rare.
Okay.
So think on things like that. You could be invisible for an hour is a pretty common, very rare potion. So be thinking about that for a minute. And... Rob, Fizzer, I'll have you guys jump down to one of the other channels and make sure you've got the timer up. At least one of you does. And we'll be good to go here.
I'm going down.
Very rare potion. Okay.
All right, and I just got to get your nameplate up here. Awesome. That worked out. Okay.
Timer's on screen, too?
Okay. Timer is on screen. Yeah, that should be good. All right, so we're starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, very rare potion. What do we want this thing to do? Something cool, right?
Healing is boring.
Healing is very
boring. Are boring.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking? We could do something with a spell-like effect?
A spell-like effect is always a good idea, in which case we'd probably want to link it to something like a 6th or 7th level spell. That'd probably be effective. Although invisibility is only a 3rd level.
Yeah, I'd say somewhere between 3 and 5.
3rd to 5th level. Okay. What is a really cool... I'm thinking of spells like... dimensional spells like Blink and Dimension Door.
A Potion of Blink? That'd be interesting, because that's the one that happens every turn, going.
Right, but I'd like to do something that's not just a pure spell effect. So maybe it's not a pure Blink. Maybe it's more of... some
stuff. What could go with that teleporting? So you could teleport at the end of your turn, and when you roll the die, and then also what else happens when you get there?
What if you could choose? So blink takes you. Does it take you into the ethereal plane?
It does.
It does.
And
okay.
you're there until your turn starts again. You do your
What
turn,
if
and
this
then you roll the die.
What if this potion wasn't exactly entirely a good thing? What if it's cursed? What if it takes you somewhere like the Feywild or the Shadow Realm, the Shadowfell?
Yeah.
You could do
and
something.
There's dangers on the other side.
Right.
Too.
Right. There's a chance that when you start your turn, it's not at the end of your turn that you blink; it's at the start of your turn. That could be interesting, and so you might end up having to spend a whole turn in the Shadowfell with something coming after you.
I like the Shadowfell for that.
The Shadowfell feels cool. It's underused, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a basic idea of what it does. What does it look like, and what is it called?
So, Curse Potion of Blink is too straightforward.
Right. So I'm thinking like a
Shadow Step Potion.
Shadow Step. That's good. That's good. I like the potion of Shadow Step. And we could also add an addendum in there that it puts you in a place in the Shadowfell where there might be something useful and there might not be.
Yeah, there could even be like you pop in and there's just an item on the ground. And you're like,
right. And there might be a danger there that would require you to be very careful. I think that would work pretty well. And as far as what it looks like, I'm kind of picturing a darker liquid with a layer of smoke or fog sitting on top. And it looks like you've frozen. That's not good. Hello? You still there, Walker? Or did I freeze? Oh, great. Ah, we're back.
Hello? You there?
Hello. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry. You I think either you
I
or
cut
just
out. I
dropped
cut
for a
out.
minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Weird. Well, we lost some time. I was picturing a darker liquid with a layer of smoke or fog sitting on top.
Okay, I like that. And
yeah.
It could almost be like a Ventablack, where it almost seems to absorb light around it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that for sure.
Okay.
All right. So we have the Potion of Shadow Step. It's a pure black with a layer of wispy fog, darker gray fog, almost like a thundercloud.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Okay. And it blinks you. It has the chance to blink you to an area of the Shadowfell at the start of your turn that might have something useful, but might have something dangerous.
So do we want to make it like a 6 is something dangerous, 1 to 3 is just somewhere in the Shadowfell, 4 and 5
4 and
is
5
something
has
useful?
something useful. Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
Rolling a d6. Yeah. And what would you have to roll on a d20 to blink? Above a 10?
10 or higher.
10 or higher,
the spell, I believe.
Yep, I think that would work.
That way, you could even sell it off as when they don't know exactly what it is. They're like, "Oh yeah, this is a potion of blink," and it performs
Potion of
much
blink,
the same way, except it looks different, and you go somewhere else.
Right. All right.
Okay.
Well, even with our issue, we managed to get out of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, they'll hop back up here pretty quick.
Hey,
welcome back.
Hey. Turn on my camera. Please hold.
Okay, good. We're in the back order, the same order. We had a minor technical difficulty. My computer had a freak out, and the stream died for about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, I think. So we lost a little bit of time, but it should still be up. According to my computer, it's still up. I'll just double check that real quick.
Alrighty.
Well, we'll find out it later. It should have recorded still throughout the process. Anyways, we'll find out. So. Let's go ahead and roll to see who goes first. Let's see. Fizzer and Aaron. Fizzer and Walker, go ahead and roll. My brain.
Yeah,
sorry.
He's already out, so.
11.
13.
All right, you guys go first.
We have created the Witches 3. a trinity of potions which must be brewed together. That you'll see where we took the idea from, which inflict a series of melodious effects. They are most useful when you get your opponent to drink them, but they can be potentially used for other pathways. Rob, why don't you tell them what it does?
So the first one we came up with is I guess called the Death Potion. It takes a Constitution DC 17, otherwise taking 5d10 necrotic damage. The second one, a potion of basically severe persuasiveness, almost taking the effect of a dominate person for an hour-ish type of potion. Being able to basically tell somebody or persuade somebody what to do. And the third one being a potion of pure neurological pain, kind of taking almost the idea of Tasha's hideous laughter and causing a sense of paralysis, only causing psychic nerve pain damage in your head. And if you haven't guessed what this is based off of yet, the very first thing I thought of was the Harry Potter's 3 Unforgivable Curses turned potion form, being Imperius Crucius and Death Curse, right. And so causing psychic damage, something along the lines of 2d6 for 10 minutes or something along on each minute mark type of thing, you know. But yeah, those are the 3 that we came up with, or the one.
The 3 in 1. Yes.
Yeah.
Don't let a hag get those.
That would be awful.
Horrible.
That'd be awful. All right. Well, we came up with the Potion of Shadow Step. It sits in a pretty plain glass vial, but the liquid inside is pure black. It absorbs all light that encounters it, and sitting on top of it is a layer of fog that almost looks more like a thundercloud. Walker, you want to walk through, pun intended, what this potion does?
So,
Sorry.
You may think it looks a little bit odd, but sold by a snake oil salesman on the side of the road, he'll sell it to you as a potion of blink. Maybe it looks a little weird, but that's just a different brewing process. What it really is it functions much the same way as blink does on the person, where you roll, you get transported to the ethereal plane, you can move around, you can pop back. Except it's a little bit cursed. They messed up in the brewing process, resulting in the color in the smoke. And instead of going to the ethereal plane, you go to the Shadowfell. And you appear somewhere in the Shadowfell where there could be something good, something bad, or nothing at all. So when you drink it, you roll first a d6. On a 1 to 3, you go with no effect. You just pop in the Shadowfell. A little confused. You can still move around, and you pop back much the same way Blink does. On a 4 or 5, you roll, and you go into the Shadowfell with something useful there. And this is where you give the GM a little bit of freedom to do what you will, because a Shadowfell is not a place you normally get to have your players go. You can have items, you can have potions, you could have someone that gives them a piece of advice, you could have an otherworldly being, you never know. It's a lot of fun. And then if you roll a 6, there's a danger there, whether it be a monster, a trap, a poison, something to hinder their progress, and it becomes a little bit more interesting because, like Blink, at the end of each of your turns, if you roll a 10 or higher on a d20, you go back. So if you roll 1 to 3, it's just like Blink, except you go to the Shadowfell. No big deal, no change, you use it the same way. 4 or 5, you could be having a very interesting broken up conversation with someone in the Shadowfell if there's a person there. But if there's a danger there, you could be fighting 2 fights at the same time, one in the real world, one in the Shadowfell, going back and forth in between the two, and just being in a rather poor spot. So that is the Potion of Shadow Step.
All right, so the link for the poll to choose who wins has been posted. You guys should have access to that, as well as everybody in chat. If you want Rob and Fizzer's potion, or Potion in 3, to win, vote for option A. If you want Walker's and mine, the Potion of Shadow Step, vote for option B. And just because I'm not exactly sure how many people are in chat, we 4 may vote as well, based on which we think sounds cooler. So we'll have a few minutes for the vote, and while the options are being chosen, we'll just discuss those potions and sort of what we think works and might not work about each of the different choices.
Also, if you are starting to think about questions, this is a great time to drop them in the chat too.
Absolutely. We will have a few minutes for questions after this segment.
I can make a little bit of time, even if we're stretching things. The possibility of drinking a potion that you don't totally understand and suddenly having to fight on two fronts is a
Very
wonderful.
interesting for sure.
It'd be a fun tool to play with for
escalation.
GMs. Definitely would require some balance.
This
but
would be
For sure.
like I
balance
said, a
be
good one for
damned, it's
snake oil
interesting.
salesman.
Yeah. And I like the
how-
idea,
Yeah.
your guys' potions with a 3-in-1 that kind of come in a set, brewed together. That's a very interesting idea. Something that's not really explored a lot is actually the process of creation of something like that.
That's not true. You guys just refuse to get into it in my game.
Okay, in fairness, I did learn how a potion was brewed in your game. In my session
refused.
1.5.
I'm getting smarter. I'll give it a try. I swear.
We do not have a
You
smart party.
refuse.
We do not have a smart party.
Yeah.
All right.
But
Well,
yeah, it'd be cool. Like you have the different steps of it, so you strain off the first thing that comes when you mix them together, and that's the first potion. You take the solid aspect of it and you diffuse it with something and get the liquid out of that. That's the second one, and then the burn blackened stuff on the bottom is the last, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
I mean, something I've explored in my game was non-standard witch magic that relied on, the last component to this spell that we are working is for you to have a conversation with me. Those more like esoteric actions that a player can take, and they bloody ate it up. It was great.
All right. Well, after a couple of minutes with the polls being open, we do have a clear winner. That being the option A, your guys' 3-in-1 potion. So for the next GM support group, I will have prepared an item card for that, which means I'll get to go back and rewatch that segment because I didn't write anything down. But yeah, we will have an item card for that, and a link will be in the description on the YouTube VOD, so you can download a picture of that item card for yourself in your games if you wish to use it. And that potion will now forever be in my world. So thanks for that, guys.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing either.
A hag is gonna have it.
A hag it's definitely gonna have it.
Exactly.
It does. It does.
Brewing this, or cauldron type.
Absolutely.
Food will never be safe again.
Never again. All right. So we're
I
gonna go
wanted
ahead.
to add the bit of like all three of them must be used before something else, but no, that's too complicated.
That might make it a little tricky to work with.
Same person drinks all three.
Something interesting could happen if somebody drank all three of them.
Oh god.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna go ahead and jump into the Q&A section of today's video. So we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Q&A. This week we got one emailed question from our audience. This coming from Echo. Hello, Echo. Today's question
Echo.
Asks in particular, how do you recommend distributing, placing magical items that players can find, buy, steal, etc. during a campaign? How do you know what rarity to do? Do you do it based on what level they are or what's going on in the story, or is it a combination of both? And we'll start with that part of the question. There's a little bit more, but I have a feeling a lot of that's going to be answered as we talk about the first part. So let's go ahead and roll again, I guess. And actually, for Q&A, we can just kind of do a panel-based thing. If anybody has any particular opinions on magic-based items, I'm sure we're going to have varying opinions, as is entertaining in this show. So if anybody would like to volunteer to go first, feel free to do so. If not, I'll probably jump in.
I'll go first. So I definitely, going into the last part, it definitely, in my opinion, depends on level and storyline. I think the most rare thing you guys have right now is like maybe a rare item. one rare item at level, what, 6 are you guys now?
We're
6,
7. We just leveled up to 7, I think.
Oh god, you just leveled up 7.
Yeah.
Percent help. So you guys are due for some rarer items at this point. But as you guys fought the last boss basically and came into it, you guys got useful magical items to help you in your current world that you wouldn't have found otherwise, that I happen to give you guys, right? But you also found some random things too, like the robe, for instance, the robe of the patches or whatever it's called.
Robe of useful items, yep.
Thank you. Yeah. So I do a kind of like a random table of a certain up to a certain rarity to give you guys just base things that you guys may have not found otherwise, but definitely things that will help you along your journey that are most useful. Obviously, a bag of holding, your goggles that you guys found, the scrying necklaces, which you may or may not know are useful. I think it's definitely up to the GM when to give those out and how to give those out. But I also think that it's up to the players a little bit too, in the sense that, hey, I want to go out and find some powerful magical items. Let me do some research, like in a library or asking around town, like, hey, are there some ruins about or anything like that? And making it almost like a little bit of a quest, kind of like the Dread Gauntlet, for instance. We knew things were down there, right, because of the research that we had done, and we made it a point to go to there and search for these things: money, fame, research, like all this different types of things, right? And so I think it's definitely up to the player as well. If the players don't ever go on quests to find these special magical items, I don't necessarily think it's up to the DM to always give them to you, the player, just because we're playing D&D, right? It should definitely be part of a storyline, I think. But the severity and powerfulness and things like that definitely is up to the GM to kind of go along with the storyline and to go kind of along with the level. Like, I don't want to give anybody a Vorpal blade at level 7, right? Like, that might be a little bit too powerful.
You can use my Vorpal homebrew.
Yeah. But that's my take on it. So
I agree with that to a point. The exception being stores. Magical stores are something I love to make, love to run, because you can do something like put something that's way beyond their price range, way beyond their level, up on a pedestal so they can see it and they'll remember it and they know it's there. So even going on all of these adventures is in the back of their mind. It's back there. I could go back and buy it. I'm going to be saving my money for it. I need to do jobs so I can go get this wonderful thing, and it drives a bit of the story there if it's a higher level magical item. Same with if it's in a dungeon or something and they know about it, it's, all right, we know where it is, how do we get to it? Yeah.
Concept,
and it's the higher level stuff is always on a pedestal like that for me, where they have to do something larger to get it. It's not just going to be in the loot of an encounter. That's where I always give like middling magical items, and that's enough to get them by. But if they really want something special, they got to work for it.
And I'm going to jump in because I'm pretty sure Fizzer's answer is going to be quite different based on the type of games he runs. I do it very much the same way, of course, which shouldn't be surprising to many people at this point. The three of us have been playing D&D for 3 years at this point together. Although I will say, almost all of the loot that you guys got in my game was randomized. The only exceptions to that is when it's an item that is entirely story-based, like Kindro got the Orb of Many Questions. He got that for completing a storyline. Some of the things in the Dread Gauntlet of Xyrem were entirely story-based as well. Loot that some very, very high-class enemies had, like the Emperor of Corva, his loot was mostly randomized, but then he had a couple of items that were specific to his story. The only other exception that I make to that general rule of randomized based on their level is in making sure that every character gets something. So if I go in and take a look, and see that Elias has 3 items attuned and Galandril only has 1, I'm going to go and make sure that in the next big pile of loot that they find, Galandril is going to find something useful for him. Now, of course, there could be an argument about who gets it. Nitrinza might want it. It's a powerful bow, but Galandril really only has this, and Nitrinza has been fighting more with his magic lately. And again, I do much the same thing with my magic shops. I base everything in there based on how large the city is. The larger the city, the more likely you are to find rarer and rarer magical items. And then The only thing to stop your players from buying them or stealing them is the price point, and B, the powerful abilities of the shop owner. People who own these kinds of shops generally are going to be able to defend themselves.
Yeah. My only problem with the shop things, why I didn't go over it, is you guys travel. Like my campaign has a decent amount of travel in it, and so you never necessarily go back to the same shop twice. As of yet, anyways, you know.
Right.
And so that's why it's a little bit harder in my campaign to do that. But yeah, I agree. Mike and Steven's having Frank and all them, you know, being able to kind of call on them and see what they had in stock at a given time is definitely cool.
And now, time for something completely different. I've run both Numenera and D&D, and my approach to handing out like powerful items is different in both because they're different games and they require different things. In Numenera, I'll get that out of the way because I'll talk about it less. There are items called ciphers, which are single-use magic items. Kind of like scrolls in D&D, but anyone can use them, and they're typically more powerful than longer-use items. Like you pick up something, and it's a single shot, but once you use it, all of a sudden you can teleport anywhere within a 10-mile radius, and you can bring people with you, but you can only go one way because it uses up afterwards. The other type of item you can pick up in Numenera is called an artifact that has what's called a depletion die. Basically, every time you use it, you roll and see if you get a 1 on that die. If you hit a 1, then that's the last time that item functions, and then it depletes. So in both ways, the items that you give characters in Numenera are temporary. And as that's the game that I started with, I started off with, why does what is balanced matter? I can just give them a bunch of items, they'll use them, and then they'll have to get more. Our artifacts stick around longer and become more defining, but in general, it lends itself to a very quickly moving and fluctuating experience for the players. Like they pick up a thing as like, ooh, I really want to use this, but like it's also super powerful, so I want to hold it back. And there's always that tension back and forth of, if I use it now, something really good will happen, but if I hold it back, then I'll have it for some other future experience. And that's, for some players, a very, very fun game loop. In D&D, I have not really given them any base D&D items. I've almost entirely homebrewed them. And they're almost all story-based. Like the ring that the warlock found became a focus for the warlock to contact his patron through. And once the shattered gem on that ring was repaired, it became a ring of flight. Once a day, gets to cast flight, and it is non-concentration, lasts for 10 minutes. You can do a lot of stuff with that. And he really, really enjoys it. They're level 4. I might upgrade it.
Powerful item for a level 4 character.
And yet I'm giving powerful items to all of them. I want everybody to have like a type of signature item that they can upgrade over time. So for the warlock, that's the ring. For the barbarian, he has a bear cloak, which is partially bonded to his soul and is gradually giving him, gigantic Arctic bear powers. For another character, it is a staff that he's like collecting all of the materials for that will allow him to control more undead. And in each case, it's something that connects to who the character is and allows them to, as a character advances, become more powerful in ways that aren't just, oh, I got another level, I got another spell, I got another ability, that sort of thing. I have other magic items that, I hand out, but they're still magic items that fit into the world and the locations that they find them in.
Interesting.
Because it's a really big thing for me when I'm running a game to believe something could be there. In Numenera, all of the random items are scattered around because it's the ruins of multiple previous civilizations. In D&D, it's, at least in the game that I'm running, a much more grounded experience, and you're not just going to randomly find, like, I found a potion. in this very ancient and abandoned shopping mall. Wow.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Echo, that answers some of your question. There are obviously a lot of different ways to handle magic items, and I have a feeling that for a lot of people, the happy medium is a good answer. A lot of homebrew, but then a lot of random items depending on how much time you're needing to put in or have to put into a particular area and loot in that area.
And the safe way to start off is, read through the standard items that people could pick up at those levels
Absolutely.
and tweak them. That's the safe way into homebrew.
And homebrew is probably a segment we'll talk about a little more in a future session as well. However, for the moment...
I forgot to mention I also have a huge rule table, too. Oh, well.
We'll talk about that another time. Yeah. I'm going to cover your face for a second, Walker. Again, for those of you who missed it earlier, if you want to ask us ask us a question by email, words are failing me, in between now and the next session, that is the wrong subject line. Ignore that. You can send us an email at gamemastersanonymous@gmail.com. I will find it regardless of your subject line at the moment, so I'll figure that out for next time. There's always a glitch. There's always going to be a glitch. If that's as small as it is this week, I'm okay with it. That being said, if you do have a question, send it to us, and we'll do our best to answer. The more questions we end up getting, the shorter our answers will likely have to be, just because we don't want this to be a 2-hour-long thing. Even 90 minutes is probably a little longer than most people can suffer through. But that was a great question and a great way to end today's session of the GM Support Group. So thank you, panelists, for joining me, and we will see you all in the next session, November 1st. See you there. Bye.
Ciao.
See you next month.
Bye.